Hey guys, what's up? I'm Erin and welcome back to the channel. If you know me, if it's about retirement or if it's about Social Security, you know I want to talk about it. And this week, we're talking about both. I recently ran across an article published by MoneyWise titled Professor G Supports Ending Social Security for 10 to 30%. Now, this is a pretty bold statement, so I want to unpack it. And I want to break down what Professor Scott Galloway actually said, why I don't agree with his take, what the data really tells us about retirees and wealth, and who truly depends on Social Security for survival. So here's what Scott Galloway said on his podcast. Somewhere between 10 and 30% of people who get Social Security right now should not receive it, because they don't need it. He goes on to add, I'll go as high as a third of senior citizens should not be getting Social Security. This is a very polarizing take, and remember, on this channel, all perspectives are welcome, but I do want to say, no matter what your take, we debate an idea, not a person. Truth be told, Professor Galloway has said many things that I've loved. In fact, once he gave the best definition of rich I have ever heard, so much so that I did an entire video on it. And if you're curious to check it out, I will link it above and down below. But in this case, I don't agree. I'll explain why. Let's start with what he's getting at. Professor Galloway is suggesting that wealthy retirees don't need Social Security and that we should consider cutting their benefits to reduce pressure on the system. Now, if someone has a very robust investment portfolio or a very reliable pension, they may not be dependent on Social Security for survival. That part isn't wrong, but let's break it down with real numbers. According to the latest Federal Reserve data on net worth, excluding home equity for Americans aged 65 to 69, so recent or near retirees, the 70th percentile has a net worth of about $510,000 in investable assets. The 80th percentile, about $1.1 million, and the 90th percentile, around $2.8 million. Remember, these numbers are just investable assets. It does not include home equity because in retirement, you still need a place to live, and your investable assets are what's capable of generating an income for you. So yes, the top 10% may have very substantial assets, but once we start talking about the top 20% or the top 30%, those numbers really don't stretch as far as people might think. Let's take the 70th percentile, $510,000 in investable assets. Using the conservative 4% withdrawal rule, that gives a household $20,400 a year. That number is per household. It's not per person in the household, per household total. What if we stretch it to a more aggressive 5%? That's $25,500 annually. Now ask yourself, is that income enough to cover food and utilities and housing and rising costs for a 30-plus year retirement? Or what if we look at the 80th percentile, $1.1 million in assets? Using a 4% withdrawal, that gives you $44,000 a year. With a 5% withdrawal, you get $55,000 a year. This is absolutely better for sure, but it's certainly not lavish, especially when we consider couples with long life expectancies and rising medical expenses. When people hear the term millionaire retiree, so many people picture yachts and golf clubs, but the reality is many retirees in this category, most retirees in this category, are living very modestly. They're driving Toyotas, not Lamborghinis. And that's where I think Professor Galloway's argument really breaks down. When we lump together someone who has $500,000 or $1 million in investments with a retiree who might have $10 or $20 million in retirement savings, we're painting with a very broad brush, and it's not accurate. Because what happens if the market drops? What if both spouses live to the age of 95 or beyond? What if they need long-term care? There's a lot of unpredictability when it comes to financial planning and investments in retirement, but Social Security is the one predictable piece of the puzzle. It doesn't drop when the S&P 500 does. As Charlie Munger once said, Social Security is a very capitalistic institution with profoundly good effects. It's one of the most successful things the government has ever done in terms of efficiency and good effects. And I couldn't agree more. Now, with that said, I want to address two important points that I do think are worth adding to this conversation. First, absolutely, yes, there are retirees with a net worth of $10 or $20 million in investments who could likely do without their Social Security check. Now, if we're going to talk about introducing some sort of means testing, we should really be talking about doing this at the uppermost ends of the wealth spectrum, and that is well above the 70th or the 80th percentile. Second, we do have a real solvency issue with the Social Security Trust Fund. If nothing changes, benefits could automatically be reduced for everyone around the mid-2030s. So yes, reform is absolutely necessary, but issuing cuts to a middle-class retiree who is relying on Social Security for their survival is the wrong place to introduce cuts. We might want to address reforming or lifting the tax cap altogether. That's more likely to keep the program solvent for the long term. It isn't about protecting the status quo blindly. It's about pursuing smart and fair reform that protects those who need it most. Now let's also talk about how Social Security is structured. Social Security is funded through payroll taxes, and as of 2025, only incomes up to $176,100 are subject to those taxes. Anything earned above that is not taxed for Social Security. So we already have a cap on what high earners pay into the system. But this methodology is suggesting that we turn around and say they aren't able to get anything back from the system they've paid into. That's truly a fundamental change in how the program was designed. Social Security has always worked like this. Workers pay in, and then, when eligible, they receive benefits. Sure, there are spousal and survivor benefits that go beyond an individual's contributions, but the core promise has always been tied to your work history and participation in the system. If we turn around and tell high earners, you've paid in, but you're not going to get anything back, that's not really reform. That's completely rewriting a social contract. And let's be honest, most people aren't going to be on board with paying into a system for 40 plus years and getting nothing in return. That really does strike a nerve around fairness. Now, I'm not against Social Security reform. I am absolutely in favor of lifting the cap on income taxes, so we're taxing incomes well and above beyond $176,100 for the year. One of the most creative approaches I heard was the donut hole approach. Income up to the current cap is taxed, and then say incomes between the cap and $400,000 are not taxed. And then again, incomes above and beyond $400,000 a year resume paying into the system. Or we could simply remove the cap altogether. Either of these approaches go a really long way towards keeping this program solvent and keeping it there for the Americans who truly rely on it. Now, Professor Galloway also said, the fact that every year we effect a $1.2 trillion transfer from young people who are not doing as well as they have in past generations to the wealthiest generation in history means something is wrong. And I understand where he's coming from, but I think there's a generalized misunderstanding here. It's not surprising that a 65-year-old would be in a better financial position than a 25 or a 35-year-old. That's how wealth building works. They've had decades in the workforce to save and invest. That is how it works. When I was 20 and just starting out, I had very little. Now I've had 2 decades of working and saving and investing, and I'm in a better, stronger financial position today than I was 20 years ago. And I hope that when I turn 65, that I'm in an even better financial position. But that is how wealth building works. It takes time. And let's not forget, the majority of retirees are not wealthy. According to the Social Security Administration, 67% of seniors rely on Social Security for more than half of their income. 27% rely on it exclusively as their sole income source. That is not a bonus check for most people. That is the foundation of their retirement. And when we suggest cutting benefits for 30% of people, for people in the 70th percentile or the 80th percentile, we could very realistically be issuing cuts to people who are already living fairly lean lifestyles. And I'll be honest, there are absolutely some kernels of truth to what Professor Galloway has said. And he also adds that he has a point of contention with the fact that most people take more from the Social Security system than what they've otherwise paid into throughout the course of their working career. And this is absolutely true. A low-wage worker might recoup their contributions in about 12 years' time. A high-income earner might take 18 or 20 years to recoup what they've paid into the system. And that is by design. Social Security is not a personal investment account. It is a social insurance designed to prevent poverty in old age. It is a guaranteed income stream in a world full of financial uncertainty. So yes, there are multimillionaires who could do without their $3,000 monthly benefit check from Social Security. But let's not pretend that that's most retirees. And let's not try to build policies on hot takes and headlines. So now I want to hear from you. What's your take on Professor Galloway's opinion to cut benefits for 10 to 30% of Social Security recipients? I firmly believe that Social Security is a foundational point for retirement planning, and my goal is that people can go into retirement with confidence. And I think Social Security is a huge piece of that, so I really don't like to strike fear around this. I try to put material out there that can allow people to plan for their own retirement with confidence and try to remove some of the fear that is around these topics. So this is something that I truly care about, and I really do want to hear your opinion. So if you have a thought, put it in a comment down below. I post new videos every single week. If you got anything at all out of this one, please give it a like. If you're new here, please consider subscribing, or if you know of someone who might get something out of this type of content, please consider sharing. I'll see you soon. Bye.